briefly explain the structure of the webinar. Karen will be talking about practical ways that classroom teachers in primary schools can support their learners who use English as an additional language to ensure that proficiency in English is not a barrier to enjoying and succeeding in humanities subjects. Karen will be looking at the specific language demands of humanities subjects, opportunities for inclusion and engagement, and how understanding proficiency in English can enable teachers to support the development of both language skills and curriculum knowledge. She will also be looking at practical strategies for supporting meaningful, context-embedded vocabulary development, strategies to keep cognitive challenge high while supporting language demands of the subject, and strategies for developing talk into writing. If there's time at the end, Karen will take any questions you may have, so do feel free to type your questions into the chat box as they come to you, and I'll collect them and pose them to Karen at the end. Tomorrow you'll receive an email from us with a link to access the video recording of this webinar. Enough of me now. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Karen Warwick. Karen joined the Bell Foundation as a trainer in November 2020, and she shares her expertise in the primary field. Before joining Bell, she had worked as an EAL specialist teacher in primary schools as part of a large EAL teams in both London and in Wales. More recently, Karen has worked in this field in an independent capacity. Building capacity and promoting inclusive EAL provision and practice in schools have been central to her work. She's worked closely with EAL families, including asylum seeker families and families from the Syrian refugee resettlement programme at a school level. Karen has delivered in-service EAL training in a range of contexts to schools and has always enjoyed this aspect of her work. Over to you, Karen.
Thanks, Caroline. Yes, welcome everybody. Oh, where's it gone?
1 second. No.
Right. Worrying, Caroline. Okay, I'm going to go back in to share. Where is it gone? Apologies, everybody. That
don't know where that
IT went. Magic or not, wizardry. Very sorry, people.
Not to
But
worry.
while we're waiting, thank you very much for joining us this very cold afternoon at the end of a busy teaching day. I was just looking at the polls and noticing that we have some visitors from the States here, so welcome to our webinar.
Yeah, good question. Where's everybody joining us from? Charlie's lucky enough to be in Somerset.
There was other. There was the States was highlighted and other.
Surrey?
So do tell us in the chat box. Sorry, yeah.
Berlin, amazing.
Oh, wow.
Oh, Alison Kendall, I'm in Nottingham too.
Derbyshire. Snow in Derbyshire. There was the other day.
Moscow.
Oh, Moscow. Fantastic.
Bristol.
Lovely.
Sheffield.
No, yeah. Fantastic. Thank you for your patience, everybody.
And perhaps while we're waiting, if anybody's got any ideas about what they think adaptive teaching means, you might want to share those ideas. Oh, the snow's all disappeared in Derbyshire. Oh dear.
That's a shame. A friend sent me a photograph of herself in Derbyshire covered in snow. It looked lovely. Come on, finalising. That was very odd, that was, Caroline. Never mind. I haven't reached for the gin.
That's for later.
Okay, let's try again. Thank you so much, people. Let me continue. Right, so we'll welcome. So in this session, without further ado, our learning intentions will be to add an EAL lens to adaptive teaching. How the distinctive nature of humanities subjects presents challenges and opportunities for teaching learners who use English as an additional language, how you might integrate teaching of content with teaching of inherent language, and how you might apply a range of quick wins to easily support your learners, so that you have a range of strategies you might be able to use to meet the needs of your learners. Learners who speak English as an additional language so that learners of additional language are able to engage in the learning and make good progress. So we will start briefly by establishing what is meant by adaptive strategy. So to get a feel for what you think, as Caroline suggested, to start thinking about, if you could briefly write what you think adaptive teaching is in the chat box, that would be lovely. And I can see some people beginning to type, which is lovely. Thank you. I can see a couple of people type in, lovely. I'll just wait to see a few before. Another word for differentiation, okay. Learning accessible to everyone. Adapting a lesson to suit the needs of all children, to assess through different scaffolding. Great word. Thank you. Do continue to give your thoughts, but I'm going to continue now because we've lost a bit of time. So adaptive teaching. So let's first think about why we are focusing on adaptive teaching with humanities in mind, and we'll start with teacher standards. So Standard 5 clearly states that every teacher must have a clear understanding of the needs of pupils with English as an additional language, and to be able to use and evaluate distinctive teaching approaches to engage and support them. At this point, it's helpful to mention that it's a good idea to know who your learners are, your EAL learners are, know their backgrounds, needs and skills, and particularly their proficiency in English language development, which will be a theme cropping up throughout the webinar. However, in contradiction, there is no mention of EAL in the early career framework, even though multilingualism is clearly a feature of our schools, with 19.4% of learners in state schools being identified as EAL. We don't have time to look at every point in this section of the framework, but we'll consider these main points, including develop different levels of prior knowledge and potential barriers to learning, providing targeted support to pupils who are struggling, and the fact that learners are less likely to be valuable if adaptive teaching results in lower expectations. The ESF goes on, the early career framework goes on to acknowledge that learners with special educational needs and disabilities are likely to require additional or adapted support. Because there is no mention of EAL, we really don't want EAL to become conflated with special educational needs and disability. They are not extremely important. So looking at the distinctive nature of language needs of this group of learners is what will be explored in this webinar. An important point to notice is that the early career framework is that learners with special education are likely to support educational needs and disabilities are likely to require extra support. So we'll move on. So high expectations. Some educators, particularly those with little or no training or previous experience in working with learners who use EAL, may feel a need to reduce or lower academic expectations, especially for learners who are new to English. We all know that teachers' expectations are internalised by our learners. When we have high expectations of them, they are likely to strive to meet their challenge. It is a common misconception that simplifying the curriculum is appropriate, but instead we advocate message abundancy and simplifying the learning process wherever possible. The principle is that by hearing the message in different ways and with appropriate support types of and amounts of support, learners will be able to access the same curriculum. But this leads us to ask, what is adaptive teaching? Is adaptive teaching the same for learners using EAL as it is for other learners? So in many ways, yes, it is. And the answer to this could be yes. But however, as you can see from these descriptors that I'm popping up on the screen now, they're quite generic and they don't recognise the very distinctive learning needs of learners and those whose need is solely language learning. So in this sense, adaptive teaching isn't the same for all learners. The distinction for learners who use EAL is highlighted in the slide, and in the red speech bubble there, you can see that learners using EAL have a double job to do: learn English and learn through English at the same time. With many of the adaptive teaching strategies used to support EAL learners being similar to those used with learners with specifically identified SEN needs, and has led to EAL learners ending up in low ability groups. It's important to see that the strategies are used for very different reasons to avoid this, and we can see that there's distinct features that are necessary here in the shapes I've just popped up. So why humanities? Why the focus? Well, the humanities subjects bring with them the opportunity to learn about people and about the world and our place in it, our interaction with cultures and religion, and marks we have made in the world and the challenges facing us in caring for its future. Also, learners who use EAL can bring with them their own personal geographical geographies and histories and different cultural experiences that could provide such a rich and diverse resource to humanities-based topic work, so common in the primary curriculum. It's a rich and fascinating area of study. So, for example, studying a geography topic, for example, learners have to learn factual knowledge, conceptual and collaborative planning, and we can see that language. I'm terribly sorry, it's very sensitive, this Adobe Connect this afternoon. We can Caroline, there we are, and we can see that I'm not actually touching anything. And we can see that language is very much at the heart of a humanities subject, which requires competent and fluent commands of the language of instruction. So that's why we've got to focus on it this afternoon. So, assessment. As teachers, you are really well rehearsed in ongoing formative and summative assessments throughout the school year. Here, though, we're going to take a quick look at a different type of assessment. For some learners using English as an additional language, particularly those who are at the early stages of language acquisition, which may be the case with younger learners starting at school, a humanities topic in English can be particularly challenging, given how language heavy they are, as well as the potential of the lack of cultural experience related to some topics, such as, at the moment, Christmas. As we know, Standard 5 of the teacher standards stipulates that teachers should be able to use and evaluate distinctive teaching approaches to engage and support. Distinguishing between language needs and learning needs will steer those distinctive approaches that we've just had a little look at in the previous slide towards providing language support. The ECF expects teachers to learn that seeking to understand pupils' differences, including their different levels of prior knowledge and potential barriers to learning, is an essential part of teaching. To reiterate, knowing as much as we can about learners who use EAL is an important aspect of meeting this criteria. Being EAL is not a potential barrier to learning, and the learner's proficiency in English will make every difference to their success. Proficiency in English accounts for 22% of the variation in academic outcomes for learners who use EAL. Given that research has shown it can take up to 6 years for new to English learners to make progress from new to English to competent, towards competent, and then towards fluency, it's important to support those learners who arrive in early years in Key Stage 1 and 2 before they reach Key Stage 3 or 4 to develop both their language skills as well as their curriculum understanding to improve their outcomes. Some of you may already be aware of the framework for schools to inform you of your learners' proficiency in English. If you are, use this proficiency level to inform your teaching and to help you decide what scaffolding and support learners may need in the planning stage. The slide briefly outlines the proficiency levels A to E, as you can see, and the support required for an A learner who will need a considerable amount of support is very different to a C learner who needs ongoing EAL support to fully access the curriculum, as to a fluent who can operate without. Accompanying this framework is a document on classroom strategies appropriate for each proficiency band, which I recommend you have a look at if you haven't already. So, knowing a student's skill level in their first language will also be very useful, as I've already touched on. Children arriving in primary schools may have had very different experiences of education in Key Stage 2, including some who may have had little or no formal education, perhaps because of a different age of starting. So a lot of countries start formal education at 7, which would put them, in the early stages of year 3. This might be because of education, because of conflict and trauma. So there's a lot to know about first. Learners arriving into earlier settings may not have experienced playgroups or nurseries. Others will have had very privileged experiences of education, like in the international school sector. All of this will impact not only on their subject learning, but also their literacy levels in other languages they speak. Knowing the languages a child can speak and to the extent of their literacy in those languages will point to different support strategies which make good use of their linguistic knowledge. So we'll move a brief look at lesson planning now. So the early career framework recognises that adaptive teaching is less likely to be valuable if a class teacher has to create distinct tasks for different groups of pupils. It shouldn't be a task for the sake of a task. Instead, the adaptive strategy should be informed by the intended learning. Jean Conte, now a retired senior lecturer in education at the University of Leeds, asks that teachers in their planning consider what we want to do. What do we want learners to do with a language, and what kinds of language they will need. She advocates that rather than being a bolt-on meeting the needs of the learners using EAL should be integrated into the lesson plan. knowing the language demands of the curriculum area and planning on how to support the learners in meeting those demands will increase access to the same curriculum learning. We briefly unpick one straightforward task based on possibly Roman Britain and life in the Roman army, quite common Key Stage 2 humanities topic. It becomes apparent that the language demands for someone who is relatively new to English are quite significant, as you can see. So as well as needing to identify, recognise and know vocabulary, learners will also be reporting information, describing information, explaining information. We can also see that certain grammar is expected to be used, the past tense, third person. These points are, natural and normal aspects of an English first language speaker. But for EAL learner, they may use very different formats and syntax may be very varied. So, for example, there's no past tense in Mandarin. So it's good to really establish what the language demands are of what you're going to teach so that it can inform you of the best way forward. I think in primary, we do this already with our different text types that we roll through the year with our learners. Even for learners who are not new to English, the language demands can be significant, whether that is the language of a text that they need to read, for example, or in the language of a written response that they may need to produce. Looking closely at the language demands of a task can help us move away from only focusing on that sort of topic-specific vocabulary needed in the topic, and to consider more general and academic language needed to demonstrate understanding of the content. Here we can see that the language demands have been broken down into discourse, syntax, and vocabulary. It isn't intended to put you off, but rather to draw attention to the different layers of language that we largely take for granted, but which learners who are new to English might need to be explicitly taught. Once armed with an understanding of the language demands, then we can start to select the appropriate strategies. So we're now going to turn to the main sector of the webinar, which is the teaching and the learning cycle. So here we're going to consider a typical learning sequence and how adaptive strategies could be used throughout to gradually build up subject knowledge or topic knowledge, but also to acquire the linguistic skills needed to reach the final stage, which will be independent practice. There will be areas of overlap inevitably, but we're definitely not advocating trying to do every one of these suggestions. It's about matching the needs of your learners with the demands of the learning and being realistic about what you can achieve. So workload, we are human beings after all, is really important, even more so in this present climate. Some of these strategies will be quick wins, very little preparation, just a little bit of thinking outside the box about them, but others might need more time to prepare. And where that's the case, we would always advise teachers make sure they get value for their work and reuse, make templates so that you can populate it with different information. That was certainly a strategy of mine. So establishing the environment. So the teacher and their attitude towards the learner is central. Having high expectations of learners and creating an environment where multilingualism is viewed as an asset rather than a barrier will give a positive message to learners and especially to very young learners at the start of their educational journey. Of course, this won't necessarily be easy or quick, but it's worth persisting with over time to build secure environment with learners so that where learners are happy to, for example, use their first language if they wish to. Researchers into translanguages such as Garcia and Lee argue that giving EAL learners the opportunity to use their full language repertoire empowers them and enables them to reach their full potential. A simple classroom organisation can be a quick win drawn on what is already well-established good primary classroom practice, from grouping learners appropriately for tasks, general seating plans, creating stimulated and positive environments, using word walls, visual word mats. All of that is just what happens. So, but one thing you might want to consider is grouping learners by home language. This is useful where the focus is on learning new content, as it will allow learners, including those who have lower literacy skills in their first language, to discuss their understanding of concepts in their first language with good peers. One such way might be as follows. Pair a learner who speaks, for example, Spanish, but is new to English with a learner who may be more proficient in English, but also speaks Spanish. Again, as a supportive peer. Then you could include a supportive first language English speaker to provide further peer support and that all important language role modelling. Always brief the partners to make sure that they understand and of course are willing to take on the role, and so that they understand what is expected of them. For example, it's not the partner's job to do the work for the other child. So creating that high expectations of those, even those new to English learners, to participate and do some recall of what they've heard. This type of grouping work can work well, I think, with older learners particularly. For younger learners, fostering, as we know, a positive attitude to groupings, such as mixed grouping and buddying systems, as well as some first language groups if you're able to, and particularly to encourage peer support and good role models in your group activities, rather than support being thought of as low ability, will support the development of English language proficiency from the outset. So we're next going to have a look at how to, some ways we could assess knowledge of the field. So we've established that many learners who use EAL may arrive at school with a range of different educational and cultural experiences and prior knowledge. So assessing prior knowledge will highlight any gaps in conceptual knowledge, and these will need to be addressed before a new topic begins. It's important to distinguish between knowledge of language and knowledge of the topic. In primary school, for example, I know that a lot of TWL grids are widely used to activate prior knowledge before a topic starts. These could be populated with visual prompts for your learner to put in, mixed ones that could be there and ones that they don't know about, if that's one way of using them. Be normally writing them. Using home language as a resource is also a way to assess this. Assessing what knowledge is transferable is an essential part of this cycle. With older learners, you can just ask if they have home language, what they know in their home language, if they know a certain word, alongside appropriate questioning and visuals, and alongside appropriate non-fiction topic books that you might look at together with them, and with the help of translation apps. Young learners may benefit from demonstrating what they know through collaborative games such as bingos or matching pairs, and eliciting what they know through careful questioning alongside the visuals, such as you may be looking at a topic on houses and homes. You might have some visuals and you might ask them, is this a house or a castle? The picture you're showing them might be a house, for example, and their they can demonstrate their understanding by acknowledging that it is a house and not a castle. It's another quick win option that you can do, quickly access visuals for and use. So using Google Translate on the audio function with older Key Stage 1 learners, like in Year 2, for example, or even in Year 1, if you feel they could manage it, alongside playing bingo games, is useful, and they can enjoy listening to topic words in their language translated. They are able to, if they are then able to demonstrate their understanding when playing the game. It can also highlight to teachers where there may be gaps for some words in home language, so it can be used for two things. Another useful tool to use for assessing prior knowledge using home language is Google Sheets, particularly with older Key Stage 2 learners. And again, if home language literacy is proficient enough for this to be done independently. It can act as a translation of concepts as well as of keywords. You can find this out by creating a list of key vocabulary, translating it using this Google Docs function, and then providing a way for learners to indicate whether or not they already understand the word or phrase by thumbs up or thumbs down. Also provides opportunities to make bilingual visual keyword glossaries or visual word maps, many of which are accessible on well-known commercial sites such as Twinkle or Sparklebox. Translations of these can be sent home to encourage home language support. And I believe on Twinkle, the last time I was able to look, you can access some topic visual word maps in certain languages, like Polish and Arabic. I know that used to be the case. I really hope it still is. So these translations can be sent home to encourage home language support from parents who may be able to support their children by translating the vocabulary themselves and helping to create bilingual glossaries or providing any other additional translations and explanations as possible. These can be used as prompts to recall vocabulary in class. So to sum up, a focus on what possibly is known in first language is a motivating factor for learners who use EA, particularly learners in the early stages of developing their English, who may not know the English for a particular subject content, but may have covered the same areas in their previous schooling. So it's a good thing to find out. So we're going to concentrate now a little bit on build knowledge of the field. That's where our main teaching is. In her book, Scaffolding Language and Scaffolding Learning, Pauline Gibbons advocates message abundancy. So what is this? Well, quite simply, it is to build knowledge by presenting curriculum information and key ideas in multiple ways to immerse them in their new learning, regardless of their language proficiency. So including learners who are new to accessing their learning in English is an important factor and a key message in her book. The key message is to amplify the curriculum, not simplify it, and not to include beginners from this learning or give them alternative tasks because it's felt it's too difficult. The suggestion here in the slide are again well-established resources that can be drawn on for engaging all learners in conceptual learning that humanities topics bring, such as watching a historical video about the Roman army, which you can access on BBC Bite Size, as I can't show here, I'm afraid. Accessing key vocabulary from display or word mats already mentioned, diagrams, posters, and engaging them in group work and discussions, to name but a few. Pre-teaching. A head start before a topic begins by finding the opportunity to pre-teach key vocabulary or key complex language and concepts prior to topic lessons will prepare learners and ultimately improve outcomes in learner participation and output. Using simple strategies such as circle groups to drill and rehearse by listening to and repeating keywords, using simple visual flashcards are effective ways of introducing new vocabulary, particularly with younger learners. The simple my turn, your turn approach for those familiar with Read, Write, Ink works well in engaging a response. So pre-teaching also provides the opportunity for learners to hear how new words are pronounced so that they hear it and then can link it to writing when they're looking and trying to think what initial sounds they need to use in their writing. Pre-teaching might be giving a learner a list of key words or phrases to translate and to look up in a dictionary before the lesson to identify important information that might be needed to understand, particularly for Key Stage 2 learners. This involves not only looking at single words, but we can see in the example where it says crown or queen, but also in highlighting chunks of language. For example, reign for X number of years, or rule and empire. Again, parents could be encouraged to be involved in this. Topic visual word maps could be sent home, as I've already mentioned, to help with this and to prevent topic vocabulary. And sometimes during pre-teaching, what a learner knows becomes apparent and can be translated and added to a bilingual word list. One effective collaborative activity to help reinforce vocabulary, which follows on from the pre-teaching of vocabulary, that can be used in groups or even whole class, is a loop game. I'm sure you're all really familiar with playing loop games, but it not only reinforces vocabulary, but really promotes active listening, because learners need to cue into when it's their turn to identify the word when asked to. So in this example, you can see that the focus topic language is about life in ancient Rome, but the structures I have and who has is also rehearsed. So you're bringing in some simple question form into the learning there. Younger learners, and I have done this with reception age learners in my previous role, will obviously need training, but they do love it once they grasp it, and if you do it in smaller groups. Older learners enjoy them too, but they can become quite competitive, and they can turn into some quite amusing speed games. But again, pair new to English and early acquisition learners with able and good English language role models to take part in this. So we know that all learners need multiple exposure to a word before they will move from understanding it to language they can easily use. So the suggestions on the slides that I'm just bringing up are not unfamiliar to anybody. They are well-established, interactive and practical games in context, and they play them with their peers in the class as part of planned provision, not just enhanced provision. They encourage learners to practice orally and to continue to use and consolidate this vocabulary again and again, particularly if there is peer support. And you could tell that's a bit of a theme throughout this. So to find out more about these activities, do visit our Great Ideas page on the Bell Foundation website. There's one on flashcards. There's a video there that can guide you for more ideas. And I just wanted to bring this one up for explicitly teaching, because it's useful to use flashcards with pictures, with definitions of the word in English and first language to encourage that home language development, or to continue that home language development, and play matching pairs games or team games. and they're great for quizzes as well. So, going on with the theme of explicitly teaching vocabulary, what it means, its purpose, and where it fits into a sentence is an important part of continuing to deepen the understanding of the new vocabulary for EAL learners. Freya diagrams, as the one you can see in the slide, can be quickly made for this purpose. You could even just draw them if you really needed to, and can also be easily adapted to make good use of a learner's literacy in their home language. They provide opportunity to provide context. Learners can record new words, and they can put other words in and other spelling and spelling patterns related to that. Meaning, and they're part of that receptive language and productive language process. You can also add visuals in if you really, really wanted to make internalize that language even further. And just a quick brief look at technology, of which we know there's an abundance of to use to support home language, as well as research topic and use technology. So teachers can select the most appropriate aspects of technology depending on the learner's needs, and proficiency in their home language as well. So translation apps such as, say, Hi and Google Translates are available in over 100 languages. Learners can speak or type, and it will be translated in both the written and spoken form. Spoken form is always really useful in particularly with early learners and early stage learners and younger learners too. Apps which provide spoken translations are particularly useful where learners have got limited literacy in their first language. They translate so quickly, and they almost allow instant translation of conversations at times. They are also useful where learners already know concepts and only need to learn the language. So with a Google Translate app, it's possible to hover a phone, the phone's camera over a text to get an instant translation. It's amazing. I wish that had been around when I first started teaching. This is a particularly useful for very short sections of text. Possibly the most useful function is a scanning function. It's possible to use the phone or iPad cameras to scan a text, which will then be translated virtually and instantly. This could be particularly useful when the class is using a textbook. Any learners who are struggling to understand specific sections could be encouraged to use the class iPads where possible. We also have the use of online picture dictionaries, for example, like the ones you can get from Mantralingua, are really useful to have around the classroom and to use with learners. And we've got Immersive Reader there, which is also a great text translation tool. So, using barrier games to build knowledge of the field. Well, again, this isn't anything new, but as in an EAL lens to classroom activities can shed light on ways to adapt them and to ensure that learners who are new to English can access the task and also learn from it. Since producing target language requires much deepening processing activities, barrier games are really good for consolidating this. So barrier games can take many forms, like, but in this example, it's played a little like a matching game pair to demonstrate understanding of topic-specific vocabulary, but there is a barrier between the learners. So this means they've got to talk to each other to retrieve each other's information. In this case, it'll be pictures of Roman soldiers, what Roman soldiers wear and what they use in battle. So both learner A and B will have pictures and simple question cards as a speaking frame to prompt them in asking for something. In this example, learner A asks, can I have a weapon a Roman soldier uses in battle? Learner B will listen to the question and pass over the barrier the appropriate picture. And learner A will pair it with a question card. And so the game goes on for asking for different elements of a Roman soldier's equipment. Both learner A and And so the play continues, and at the end of the game, the barrier is removed and the pairs are checked. It's always a really good idea to model this activity with learners so that they can understand what they need to do, pairing them with new to English learners with appropriate partner as well, so that they can observe and then experience the game, and then with an expectation to participate in it next time. So other communication games that you can explore on the website listed there. And again, we have a video on collaborative activities to guide you through that on our Bell Foundation website. And finally, the final word in this section just briefly goes to parents and families, which I've mentioned throughout. Families are an excellent teaching resource, but they may need reassurance about using home languages and the importance of it. In humanities topics, like any other parent, they bring their own personal geographies and histories and culture to their children's learning. So it's worth communicating with parents to see how they are with regards to supporting their children with home learning and home language and getting involved in sharing their experiences where appropriate, and inviting them into school to share their experiences as well, such as explaining about Eid from a personal experience. So the Bell Foundation has produced translated guidance for parents, which is translated into 19 languages, on how you can encourage parents to support their children's learning at school. Which you can access from the website, and Caroline's popped that onto the chat box there, I can see. So deconstruct and model key learning. So in this next stage, we will consider adapted modelling and scaffolding strategies that won't be unfamiliar to you, that can be used when learners are nearly ready for writing. We know that literacy is central to effective teaching. So learners may have an excellent understanding of Tier 3 language, but they could still need support with the language needed to demonstrate that learning. Using modelling, explanations and scaffolds as the building blocks to gradually develop the skills to tackle demanded text of a new style of writing will reduce the cognitive workload and allow learners to lay solid foundation of their learning. Scaffolding provides temporary support to enable learner to move from dependent to independent learning. So we first look at talk, which is vital for learning to take place, and forms part of the influential socio-cultural theories of learning, as described by Vygotsky in the earliest 20th century on learning and language development. As the slide illustrates, talk develops at two levels, beginning with social language and then transitions to academic language that learners use to apply to writing, discussions, and eventually to their exams. When we're building knowledge of the field, we often focus on Tier 3 vocabulary and the topic-specific vocabulary needed, but it's important to remember about the Tier 2 vocabulary. So, talk, therefore, can make good use of informal vocabulary typical of speech to help activate academic vocabulary by recasting the informal Tier 1 vocabulary, as you can see on the slide, where you can see that the teacher is acting as the model of the appropriate language by recasting it back to the learner to repeat. This will help to develop the learner's own language from more spoken informal language to include more Tier 2, 3 vocabulary. Saying the structure correctly is an important part of the learning. The learners need to practice saying and writing what they hear and read in order to remember and internalise how to use that language independently. It's an effective strategy that can be easily integrated into your lessons as it happens, and again, without any additional preparation. Modelling the structure correctly is very important, though. So providing models of specific text helps learners to understand what purpose and overall structure the language features are. So by selecting a text which exemplify key structures, teachers can explicitly teach the language needed to fulfill the genre requirements. We could do shared writing, so whilst writing together, for example, like an information on a Roman soldier or the Great Fire of London or at the seaside, draw attention to the organisation of the text and vocabulary. Use this as an opportunity to encourage recall and participation of more confident EAL learners to contribute to this writing as you're doing it. Your explicit vocabulary, and it's part of your explicit vocabulary teaching as you highlight things as you go along. Another collaborative strategy to provide guidance towards writing is your Pi Corbett talk for writing strategies. For anyone not familiar with Pi Corbett, simply texts are learned together using actions to prompt recall. The resource example here is in my present role, we learned as a Year 2 class with a range of learners and different levels of proficiency. We learned it together, we learned the actions, and those learners were able to write using actions to prompt their memory. Again, this kind of strategy provides plenty of peer support and scaffolding. And it's important to know that an EAL learner, for an EAL learner to access challenging texts like this, it would need to be modified. A text can be further exploited by adapting and scaffolding to it by finding keywords, text marking, sequencing short sentences, sequencing chunks of sentences, doing gap fill, closed gap fill procedure tasks, and of course the all-important visuals. A scaffolding, speaking frames. So these are a great scaffolding strategy, providing models of sentence and language structures and vocabulary that learners can be used orally in any curriculum context. In this case, it's back to Roman Britain. So we're going to master the language of the sentence structure needed to describe what a soldier wears and where he wears it and why he's wearing it in his line of duty. This particular activity is a pairs matching game, which we've met before. You can see that each example has been adapted for, we got one for a Band A learner where it's a simpler text, Band C learner to access, and we've increased or decreased the complexity of the language. On one, leaving gaps for learners to fill in. The sentence can be matched to the visual provided. You can provide further scaffolding by providing a visual gap fill word math or one without, depending on your the level of challenge and the proficiency of English of your learners. So substitution tables, another effective scaffolding strategy. A table is provided of model sentences with a range of choices for learners to select and construct meaningful sentences in context. EAL learners using a table like this will reduce their cognitive workload of trying to think, what should I write? The language has been given to them. They just have to produce it in a meaningful way. And in the process, they demonstrate their understanding of the subject. Substitution tables, they scaffold talk, writing, and the development of particular grammatical features. In this example, the past tense and prepositions is used to describe about the Roman soldier. It activates links between informal register and more formal academic register that is then required, leading towards being able to write the sentences more independently. This example has got visuals on it, so it would be good for a Band B learner, for example, and a Band A learner with some very supportive peer models with them. And in this one, there's no visuals, so you'd be challenging your learners a little bit more with that. You can provide, again, a visual word mat to have on the side to just scaffold that a little further if you feel it's needed. And again, on the Bell Foundation website, you can access more information on our Great Ideas page, and there's a webinar and a video on more information on how to use substitution tables. And finally, well, not quite finally, but we're going to look at Dictogloss, which in short is a type of supported dictation. And it works like this. The teacher reads a short curriculum-related text several times, and the learners try to provide their own version as close to the original as possible. With a complex range of language demands and structures needed to be used and mastered when tackling humanities topics, using Dictogloss is a strategy that not only provides an alternative type of text modelling, but also the opportunity, again, for that active listening and collaboration to take place. There's also the chance for EAL learners to notice language and produce it themselves. It's very effective language learning tool as it requires the learners, as I say, to listen, to take notes and to redraft. And at the end of the exercise, they can compare with the original model to see. And again, a very good strategy with Key Stage 2 learners. Before the Dictogloss, planning sessions that provide collaborative vocabulary work, such as playing simple track games to just activate the vocabulary, is also very useful and helps to contextualize and deepen the context more. This text could also be used to produce speaking frames if you wanted to, and then to make your own gap-fill closed procedures to provide further scaffolding. So you can use it for a lot of things. Again, well, Bell Foundation website has Dictogloss on it, a video about Dictogloss that you can follow and get guidance. And finally, independent practice. If we think back to the beginning of this session, we started with the idea of having high expectations of our learners, regardless of their proficiency in English, but knowing that we could need to provide a concrete type, level and amount of support. Eventually, with sufficient practice and with the right types of scaffolding, learners will need less and less support, and gradually they are confident about using the language independently. Gradually removing the scaffolding and placing greater emphasis on peer reviews and then self-monitoring will support teachers in moving towards greater independence in their ability to demonstrate their topic learning. I would say, though, with younger kids, if younger learners, however, scaffolding such as sentence starters and stems are still needed, writing frames, word mats are still required to demonstrate their understanding of topic learning. You know, still use them, use your discretion as to when you feel that shouldn't be used anymore. And it leaves me to say, go to the Great Ideas webpage for a lot more information on strategies that you can use to help your learners develop their proficiency in English and the different ways that you can adapt and use them. And I'd like to thank you very much for listening this cold and now very dark afternoon, and I apologise for the technical hiccup at the beginning. Thank you very much. Are you there, Caroline?
I am. So thank you very much, Karen. That was a really useful presentation. We haven't actually had any questions, so I think we've reached the end of our session. Absolutely perfect timing. Thank you very much for attending, and I'd just point you to the website, because as well as the Great Ideas videos, there's also from Friday all the new courses and webinars for next year will be advertised, and you'll be able to see what's planned for the year ahead. So thank you very much for attending. You'll receive a recording of the webinar tomorrow, together with any links that we've shared. So thank you very much.